Hello everybody, it's Nina. Thanks so much for joining me today for another tutorial. And today I'm going to be featuring 3 different ways to use the Simon Says stamp Dahlia Die. This gorgeous flower is so beautiful and it's a large die, which means it's perfect for using as a focal point on your card. This will allow you to make cards that are fairly quick to put together, and I wanted to show you a few different ways on how I think it's really fun to use this die. So one of the ways I wanted to use this die was first to foil it. Foiling dies is another great way to be able to extend the use of your dies. I'm going to be using this in the Gemini foil press machine. However, you could use other foiling machines that are meant to foil with dies. I let the die heat up in the machine, and I'm going to lay a piece of blue foil onto the die and then a piece of white cardstock. I'll also slip in a couple of shims. I forgot to do that on camera, but I'll add a couple pieces of paper in there too, just to give a little bit more pressure. I'll remove all the shims and remove the paper from the foil, and you can see we're left with this stunning outline of the dahlia, and that's going to allow me to now color this in. The foil is going to have this beautiful shimmery outline on this flower, and then it'll almost look like no line coloring, but at the same time you're going to get that shimmery effect too. It's very subtle, but it adds a lot of beautiful interest to your coloring, and this is a great way to be able to use this die. You could also skip the coloring and just use the outline as is. I used Copic markers to color in my image, but you could also use watercolor. I've done that as well, and it works just as beautifully. To finish off the card, after coloring, I cut out the flower and I popped it up onto a scalloped rectangle that I also foiled those little stitching lines into. I'll pop this up onto a cover plate die from Pink Fresh Studios. This is the Geo Leaf die. And I'll pop that entire piece up off of a white cardstock. These layers add a lot of great depth to this card, and like I said, that beautiful foiled outline just adds the perfect amount of shimmer to this card without it distracting from the actual coloring. Now, if you want to go super sparkly, another fun way to use these dies is to do inlay die cutting. I'm going to be using glitter paper for this particular inlay die cutting technique. I want to first cut out the outline of the die itself. So I will cut it from some white glitter cardstock, remove it from the die, and stack this white glitter piece onto 3 layers of white cardstock that is also cut from the Dahlia die. When I layer the 4 die cuts together, that's going to allow me to have a stacked flower. And then I will be able to inlay the negative pieces of the flower into the recessed areas. For those negative pieces, I'm cutting out the flower in both light blue, dark blue, and green glitter cardstocks. I'm going to use the light blue and the dark blue together for the petals, and then the green will be for the small little leaves. As I'm cutting these out, I am making sure to save all of those little pieces because I could also make some additional cards using the leftover outlines or negative pieces that I have left over from all the die cutting. So make sure you save those because you'll be able to get a lot of use out of them. Here's where I'm taking those white outline flowers and I'm going to stack them all 3 together with the glitter cardstock, and that's going to allow me to have that dimensional flower like I mentioned. For the spray adhesive I'm using is the E6000 adhesive. This is a spray adhesive that has no odor, so it's really nice. It's a non-aerosol adhesive, so it's great and safe to be around kids, pets, and even if you have allergies. I'm popping this up off of a card. I just watercolored a fun background, and then I'm going to start inlaying all of those negative pieces that I had cut out. I'm using my Tim Holtz craft pick to help push these into place. This is really simple to do and so much fun. It adds a lot of really beautiful interest to this die cut. I used dark blue for the inner portions of the petals. I thought by adding multiple colors, this really gives the flower a lot of contrast. Now you could have used other colors besides blue. I just felt like blue really looked nice with this. I finished off the card with some simple sentiments and a few sequins, and that really just sets off this gorgeous flower. And like I said earlier, this flower is so large that it really just takes center stage on your card. You don't have to get fancy with the card designs. So my third idea is to use scraps. I don't know about you, but I have so many scraps that I absolutely never use. I wish I did. I wish I used them more often, but for some reason I always end up cutting more paper down, or I come up with a new background and I don't use the old backgrounds that I had set aside from another project that I didn't use. And I was like, you know what? I want to challenge myself to use those scraps to create cards. So using that dahlia, I'm cutting it from scrap pieces of foil paper or cardstock. I'm using them with backgrounds that I had left over from other projects. I have lots of white cardstock scraps. So I stacked a bunch of these dahlias together to create dimensional florals for these cards. This was really simple to put together. I did this in assembly line style, so it really didn't take that long. It took me just a couple hours to put all these scrappy cards together. And it was really fun. And you know what? I felt so good about using all of these scrap backgrounds and cardstocks that it really just did. It made a nice dent in my stash, which I was really pleased about. So the backgrounds are all things that I had left over from other projects that I never used. And so I've always set those aside and used them for other things, but then of course I never seem to use them. So I'm making sure to use those today. One of the other things I wanted to use was this Avriel You've Got This stamp set. So I picked out scrap pieces of colored cardstocks and matched them up with each of the cards, and I'm going to stamp sentiments from this stamp set onto these cardstock pieces. Some I stamped with just some ink, like this one here. I stamped with purple ink from Simon Says Stamp onto white cardstock. And then many of the others I embossed with white embossing powder onto colored cardstocks. I loved the sentiments in this stamp set. I first saw this stamp set at Creativation 2019, and it just immediately grabbed me because it has so many encouraging sentiments in it and some very unique ones too, which I was really happy about. So I wanted to use these on these cards because you can never have too many encouragement cards. I cut each of those sentiments out using the Simon Says Stamp Sentiment Labels die set. This cuts nice sentiment strips in varying sizes so that you can have a perfect sentiment strip cut without having to worry about if it's straight or not, because the die does all the work for you. I popped each of these sentiments up off of the cards, and like I said, these were really easy and so much fun to put together. Just a few simple embellishments, including the sentiment and a couple of sequins, was all it took to finish up these cards. Because the dahlia is so big and it takes so much focus on the card, you really don't need to go crazy with decorating. I used sequins that I have in my stash, a variety of Simon Says Stamp sequins, and then a few from Lucy's cards as well. I really loved how all of this came together for these very simple yet encouraging cards using that dahlia. And the best part was that my stash got broken down a little bit. So I was really excited about making all of these cards. I hope that these 3 ideas have inspired you to create with the Dahlia die from Simon Says Stamp. It's a really versatile die and so much fun to use. I think you will have as much fun creating with it as I have. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to stop by our blog for more information, and you can subscribe for more weekly videos. Thanks for tuning in, and I will see you very soon. Bye!